So good evening and welcome. My name is Sue-Ann Waugh. I'm the Integrity Manager at Pony Club Australia. We are tonight talking safeguarding and integrity. I hope you have a good night. If you do want to chat with me, whack anything that you've got to say in the chat space. I particularly find this is a good way to share your knowledge and what you've experienced in your clubs as well with everyone else on the webinar. So don't be shy, chat away in there. Again, thank you so much for being here. We are recording these, so I will send it around. I just had someone ask whether they said they probably should have all the committee in watching at the same time. Yeah, feel free to set up a large screen and show it at your committee meeting, or otherwise just, yeah, you can share around the recording and maybe have a bit of a chat about it later. We will move on because I've got a pretty big session ahead and I want to get through it before 8 p.m. so I can release you to the wild. So this is the Club Development Program webinar series, and we're now at session 4, Safeguarding and Integrity. We'll go into risk management and then recruiting and retaining members as the last one in October, so September and October. This session, game plan, we're going to cover game plan. So I keep doing game plan because one of the reasons for running these webinars is to talk about game plan. So anyone I can get in there to have a bit of a cruise around would be fabulous. I'll cover the NIF and SIA, great little acronyms, and we've got plenty of them in the NIF and integrity space. We'll have a look at Pony Club policies very quickly, and then we'll look at safeguarding and child safeguarding specifically in this session. And complaints. So game plan is free, it's online, it's there really to support your organizations. The more I look at this product, the more I think it just helps to order thought around what we've got in place in our clubs. So I do encourage you to jump in. I think some clubs might be thinking that it feels more like just some more work, but I think potentially if you're going to use it, I would either get someone who's really keen in this type of area, that they're a bit excited about this, so they may or may not be on a committee, get them to maybe do the parts with you and then go away and build the resources. Otherwise, put a spot on your committee meeting where you maybe say we're going to do this part of game plan and then work on a module until you've finished it. Or get a little group together, a little working party who are a little bit excited about planning and doing those types of things, and then help support the committee to actually put in place some of the capabilities in there. So I think there's a few different ways of using the product, and I'll leave it up to you to decide which one best fits you. One of the good things about game plan is the resourcing in it. There's lots of resources. So we're still working on creating more Pony Club orientated resources, but if you're looking for a resource and something you want to adapt, there's definitely one in there. So if you don't have something, it might be worthwhile putting in there. If you think there's a better resource created later, then just update it. This, as I say, this webinar series is kind of being put in place to support game plan, and in game plan you'll also find there's a safeguarding module. So it'll help you decide where your club is at in terms of safeguarding. It's particularly around child safeguarding. So if you want a little bit of structure and how you're approaching it, this might be a good thing to do. This module might be a good one. Things that I really do like is the fact that it'll give you current maturity. So based on what you actually answer in the module, it'll tell you how mature your club is in this area. It will then allow you to understand what that means. So it gives you a bit of a, this is who I am, this is why we've got this maturity level, and then what do we have to do to raise ourselves to the next maturity level. It also lets you create action plans. So those action plans mean that you've got a bit of a plan in place, and you can print those out and they can actually help drive your committee a little bit. So a little bit of strategic planning in there, I guess. And it also tells you, if that's off the screen, so I don't think we're going to see it. It gives you recommended resources to help you get to the next level. So it already dictates to you or tells you, guides you in a direction. So you don't have to go sifting through all the resources. It says these are ones that are probably going to help you get up to the next level of maturity. So it's kind of just helping support your development as a club. In all the webinars, we've talked about leadership. The reason we talk about leadership is as the committee, you are the leaders of the organisation. You are setting the tone of your club, and you're obviously doing the work to generate what's happening at the club. So I like to talk about leadership, and this, by Kevin Cruz, is a guru from the US, and his definition of leadership is that it's the process of social influence, which is communication, which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal. And the reason I think this is really good definition of leadership for clubs is that that's actually what we're trying to do. When we sit on committees, we want to communicate with people and get them excited about what we're doing and help and let them in to help us achieve those goals. So a little bit leaning towards volunteerism and getting people involved with the activities of the club. So what's it look like in your club? Leadership looks like planning, communication, understanding the jobs that are happening in a club, getting people involved. So even if that's in a little way, so that might be doing the things that we need people to do, like pick up after the rally or do a little bit of volunteerism on the day in canteen. Those are things that we want people to do, and helping them to actually get excited about being in those spaces with us and enjoying the efforts of doing it. Also, one of the most important things about leadership is not doing all the work. And I'm guessing out there, and you can correct me, that most committees will spend a lot of time doing all the work. We want to try and flip that so that we get more people doing all those little jobs for us. We're probably doing some of the bigger jobs, but we get more people helping us along the way, which might help to bring them through to do some of the more complicated jobs in the club. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about culture. Again, if you've been in these, you will have heard all this. But culture, this definition or this commentary came from Dr. Pip Grange. Dr. Pip Grange was one of the people involved with a study that was done into the Olympic swimming team that went to London and didn't really get the outcomes they were looking for. So this was, in that report, this was a commentary around culture. And one of the most important things I want you to think about is just down in that bottom part, that we know that culture is the things that we do. It is about behaviours, and tonight's webinar is a lot about behaviour, but it is about behaviours, and culture is what we accept and how we see our organisation. One of the most important things about culture is that we can direct and shape it with strong leadership and sound methodology. So we're going to have a bit of a look at that in the next couple of slides. If we have a culture in our club that we don't like, how do we change it? And if we have culture that we do like, how do we ensure that it stays? So we're looking at that sound leadership, that strong leadership and sound methodology. This is kind of what we're going to have a bit of a look at in the next couple of slides, but it's also lending itself to safeguarding and what we do in this space. Number one, this is a little methodology. So a methodology for creating or changing or identifying even our culture is to do this, to find behaviours. So we go through and we say, what are the behaviours that we want at our club? We document the behaviours in some way, shape or form, and we'll have a look at where we document them. We create buy-in. We get people to understand that that's the culture we want. They're the expectations of the club, and we get people to buy into those. And then we reinforce behaviours. So we make sure that we get the behaviours we want through promoting the behaviours we want or sanctioning the behaviours we don't want. So defining behaviours, you can jot down, even if there's something that's in your head right now, behaviours are really important, things that we actually value in our club, the kind of club that we want to have. So if you can think of any behaviour and you want to pop it in the chat that you want at your club, then go wild. But I'm just going to go through a couple of things that popped into my head. So what we want is happy members. Happy members being a very broad term, but we want people to be happy in our clubs. We want them to enjoy the club. We want them to be active in the club. We want people doing things that help our club to succeed. Helpful members. So we want people volunteering. We want them doing jobs around the club. We want them to do certain jobs around the club. So these are all things that we want people to do in our clubs. Recruitment. We might want people to help us get people to come and be a part of our membership. So helping you to recruit. Representing the club. So you might have state champs, so you want people to actually be engaged or wanting to do those types of things. Raising funds for the club. Obviously, clubs always need fundraising. So being active in that space, being able to, when you have a fundraising event, to either be coming to it, helping organise it, or supporting it in whatever way, shape or form. And getting involved with activities. So when you're running things, there's nothing worse than organising something and having people not come to it. So really being involved and active in the club in that way. These are all things we might want. And there's probably a truckload of other things we might want. I've got a few coming in here. Definitely involvement. Yeah, we do want people involved. So sometimes that's almost, it's a really important step, but we actually say, well, what does that involvement look like? How do we get people to understand that's what we want from them? So we'll be having a bit of a look at that, because all of this sort of wraps into a bit of safeguarding. Document behaviors. So when we're documenting those behaviors, what we often do, some of those behaviors are documented in the constitution. So we've got things that our club is saying we're going to do, and people understand that that's what we're going to do because the constitution says. So that's like a documentation of behavior. Policies. So we're going to look at policies tonight. That's what policies are about. When we write a policy and we whack it on the desk or the wall or wherever it is, and we don't ever read it, that's just words on a piece of paper. So one of the most important things about policies is actually to read them and say, what are they saying? What's this policy actually saying to us? And therefore, what it's saying means that there's certain actions that we need to put to that policy to make it actually live in our organisation. And so we will look at that tonight in terms of child safeguarding, because that policy's got a lot of behaviours that we want to see from people and behaviours we don't want to see from people. That's what we've done in that space. We're saying this is what we want, this is what we don't want. Club rules might be a spot that you write things down. So club rules might be things like every family does pack up every 4 weeks. It might be things like you need to pick up after your horse. It might be when you have a key, you need to come back and register it every year. Whatever it is that we need from people to ensure that we run the club that we want to and create the culture we want, then we need to write these things down so that people know. Because often what happens is we don't necessarily write it down. Some people know that that's what we expect because they've been there for a few years, so it's sort of been a part of the culture. But we didn't actually tell the next person who came in. And then we pull them up about it, and then they get a bit cranky because, well, I didn't know that was the case. And then suddenly we've got conflict. So being able to be really clear about what are the things that are really important to our club, the behaviours that we want people to adhere to is quite an important step in our club. So if there are things that you think are really important, make sure you sit down at some point and write them down. One of the other things that is really important is to go out to community and say, what do they value? Because we are here to represent on committees, you're there to represent the members. So what's important to the members? What brings them into our club? What do they like about our culture? What do they like about what we've got there? What don't they like? Because that'll give you a good story as well. So you can start looking at it in terms of the community. Where's their mind with the culture? And even if there's your community come back and say, well, we don't value this, this, and this. But as a committee, you say, well, that's really important because this, and this help us to do this, this, and this. Then you have a little issue there with saying, well, how do we change people's mind around that culture? How do we get them on board with those values? Competition rules, of course, that helps us to define the behaviours we want in terms of how people compete, what's acceptable, what's not. Handbooks are another really great place to put things, and that might be a combination of all sorts of things. You might put policies that you've got in there, club rules, it might be things about uniform, goodness knows what's in there, but all these things that are valuable to our club. Selection policies or criteria. Selection does help us to define what we're looking for so people know ahead of time what you're looking for, and that also then helps to reduce conflict on the other end because we already knew that that was what's going to happen. So, if it's important that I'm there for both selections, write it down that it's important you're there for both selections. It's not negotiable. So if you can't be here for both selections, you will not be selected. If you write that type of stuff down, you have someone who doesn't rock up for both selections, you go, sorry, I can't select you because you haven't rocked up. Keeping in mind that we need that rule for everyone. So that really great person who can only come for one, they also have to be under that same policy selection. That's just an example, but having a look at what we're doing when we're selecting. Representative booklet. So anytime that we're representing and going somewhere, you might then have a set of rules as to how that person is representing you. Tends to be more for, I suppose, netball. But I think there's opportunities within our organisation where we look at it and say someone's going to go and represent our club at a zone or a state competition. We might have a little bit of structure around what that looks like so that they're going and representing the club in the way we want them to go and represent the club. This might be even down to not doing things at that event that cause the club to look poor in terms of reputation at an event. So those types of things might become important to your club because you want people to go, we like the behaviours of the individuals that come out of that club as well. So it's reputational risk that we're managing. Role descriptions are an important part of documentation. They allow people to know what their job is. They allow them to know where the parameters of their job are. It does reduce conflict because we can bring people back to their position description. So if you don't have position or role descriptions, that's probably something that I would be starting to look at as a club. Game plan will help you with that in strategy and roles. Just to start, really, strategy and roles and probably governance. I think they talk about it in the governance module as well. Being able to define what people's jobs are does help you to bring people back. So when you've got that person who's really excited and they start working over everyone's jobs, then we can come back and say, look, that's just your job. If that person needs help, they'll come and ask you. And contracts are another one. So for anyone who's actually doing some work for us that's more contract based, that might be a instructor that's coming, who's a paid instructor coming in to do work at our club. Have some contracts around what they're doing. And in terms of child safeguarding, there's a few things we really want them to do in that space as well. So it might be that opportunity to set those expectations up front. Create buy-in. There's plenty of other, by the way, there's plenty of other things that I'm sure you can sit there and go, oh, we have that documented, we have this documented, and they're all helping to actually frame up what is important to your club. Create buy-in. So in our methodology, we've defined the behaviours, we've documented it so we can keep reproducing and letting people know. Now we need to create buy-in. So we need people to actually want to follow them and value that as our culture and value the things that we're putting down on paper and asking people to do. So there's all sorts of things you can do with buy-in. You really want to be looking at all the spaces you can make things available. Websites are really great for this kind of stuff. When you're writing things down, you want people to be able to access it whenever, or that you want to lift it and put it into various social media or whatever else so that you can highlight things as they pop up or just keep them in people's minds. Present at membership sign-ups or anytime you've got a group gathering. So you might talk about the cultures of your club. You don't have to talk about it as the culture, but you might talk about the expectations that you have. And particularly with expectations, it is important to do that before people have actually bought in, because it's a lot easier to say, well, you've actually ticked to say I'm going to do all that and that I accept it, rather than present it when they've broken something later and they're like, well, I didn't know that was a problem. So it just helps to keep people in the know about what their expectation is becoming a member of you. Talk about welcome nights or sign up days. So any of those times when people are coming in to become a part of your club, that's a really good time to start talking about the things that you expect from people. Put up posters around the things that you really want people to know. So if it's about pack up, then maybe put a little poster up to say it's great when people help us pack up, or whatever it is, or what the expectations are. Something that is probably friendly. We're looking for friendly, but helps people to be reminded of what you want from them. Email during the year, so actually just talking about different things, so making sure that people are aware of what policies are around and those types of things. You might put them through newsletters, so you might just have a little policy blurb or something that you raise attention of on an annual basis, so it's not just when you have a problem, it's just all the time you're talking about these things. Putting it on social media, obviously raising it, and training and accreditation is a really important part of creating buy-in. So making sure that people are training in different areas, like you guys tonight have come in, but training and doing accreditation help to put some of these expectations in. So at the moment in the accreditation, say for coaching, part of that will include the child safeguarding policy and various parts of education around that. So that's really important, because the coaches do need to know what's going on in that space. They need to understand that child safeguarding is bigger than sexual abuse. Sometimes we think it's there, but it's also right down to how we're talking to kids, what tone we're using. So there's a little bit of a cultural shift in what the expectations of coaches. So it's a good thing that they are training in that space. Reinforcing behaviours, we'll actually touch on this again at the end of the webinar, but pretty much reinforcing behaviours are around promoting behaviours that you want. So when you're seeing the behaviours you want, thank people, put it up on socials, put it into newsletters, have that opportunity to celebrate the fact that they're doing what you want them to do. So that might be around getting certificates or doing coaching courses, all the things that we want people to do, make sure we celebrate them. And then sanctioning the behaviours we don't want, or at least addressing the behaviours we don't want. So there's a time where we say to someone, that's draw them back to what you've said is your culture, or what it is that you've written down, those expectations, and allow them to soak that up. And then if that's not working, go through a more of a disciplinary process with people so they really do understand that that's an expectation in your club. So very quickly, we're going to touch on the National Integrity Framework, which is the NIF, known as the NIF. The NIF is basically these 4 policies. It's got to do with a lot about integrity, a lot about keeping sport safe, fun and fair. So within that safe, fun and fair, we've got things like improper use of drugs and medicines policy into anti-doping. They're the types of that's a significant integrity space, particularly for elite sports. But still for us, really important space so we can tell our athletes who are pushing up into those higher levels what the expectations are in sport around this. And it does touch on a few other bits and pieces. The competition manipulation and sports wagering, it's actually called sports betting now. That's really about making sure that sport is fair and that we're not manipulating sport to produce better betting outcomes or even just helping people move through to things that they should be in. So that's sort of in that space. We're kind of in that space in that we don't want people manipulating competitions so one person gets through ahead of another. But the two spaces we particularly will be working as an organisation in, so I'm not saying they're not important policies, but these are probably the two ones that are particularly pertinent to our organisation, member protection policy and the child safeguarding policy. And all of these policies are managed under the complaints, disputes and discipline policy, which we'll touch on at the end. Sport Integrity Australia, who is SIA. So when you hear SIA, SIA is a government body that was created out of the Wood Review. So the Wood Review was a review that the government ran across the top of sport to say integrity is important. How do we make sure we maintain it in sport? So Sport Integrity Australia was created. So it's a separate entity that under law that is dealing with keeping sport safe and fair. One of its major goals is education and training so that people understand what integrity is, and they also know how to try and ensure that it actually stays in their organisations. They do provide some complaint management for some integrity matters. So some of those child safeguarding is for us as an organisation, any child safeguarding matter is managed through Sport Integrity Australia. Now, there are times we won't go to that body necessarily, and we'll go through that as we go through this webinar. But in general terms, if it's not a serious child safeguarding or child abuse issue, then we would be going to Sport Integrity Australia with our concerns or complaints. They also create a lot of resources. So there's a lot of resourcing, particularly around child safeguarding and some of the other policies, but particularly around child safeguarding. So I'll make sure you're aware of where they are and you can go and avail yourself of them. And I believe today I got an email and there's a few more out there. So we'll try and get those around to clubs in a way that's not too overwhelming because there's a lot of them. Within this framework is also the National Sports Tribunal, the NST. The NST was created in response to the Wood Review as well. And this is arbitrate sport disputes is the easiest way for me to describe this group. They do a little bit more than that. There's a bit of mediation and those types of things, but it was a group. It's a tribunal created to help sport navigate disputes and complaints, I guess, is another I can pop in there, but disputes when people are unhappy about what sport has done or what's happened outside of integrity. So that can come through to the National Sports Tribunal. I just thought I'd chuck that in because I regularly don't talk about them. And if you want to go and have a little look, then I encourage you to go and have a look at who they are and what they're doing. They're also mentioned in our policy, so I thought it might be worthwhile mentioning who they are. Now, safeguarding in general. Safeguarding covers both member protection and child safeguarding. And so I thought I'd just touch on it in terms of safeguarding. It's really about risk management, if I was to dumb it right down. It's really about assessing your environment, looking for risks to people's physical, mental, or psychological safety. Managing the risk with action, so we do know what we're going to do to ensure that we're providing a safe environment for people, and then monitoring our success. So there'll be different things that will pop up. How we're going to manage an abusive spectator, those types of things are around safeguarding. How do we keep our volunteers and our members safe when someone's abusing people at an event? Like, what are we going to do? What are the opportunities for us? So that's a little bit of the safeguarding. How do we do these things? Child safeguarding, pretty much the same thing, but it's really about ensuring that we're looking at the child's view or the young person's view, and also acknowledging that children are vulnerable. So we're still looking for risks. We're assessing the environment, looking for risks to safety, physical, mental, psychological, all of those spaces. And then we're also trying to get that child lens. So we're really looking at it from a child's perspective. Whenever I talk about child safeguarding, sometimes over the journey, I've had a bit of a look or I sort of reflect on the fact that children view the world differently to adults. They've not got anywhere near the amount of experience that adults have in the world. So children will often be scared of things that adults don't find scary because they've got more experience in life. But to understand that children's fears are real is one of those things that we should be looking at. So, a child might be really scared about going into that dark shed because it's got spiders and it's dark and they don't like it. So, and you as an adult might say it's not really that bad, but you have the experience and knowledge of what you have. So, in terms of when we're talking about child safeguarding, children's fears are real. If they're unhappy or they're uncomfortable, they're real because they just view the world a bit differently to us. Now, so we'll flick from there into the child safeguarding policy. So this is the National Integrity Framework, child safeguarding. Actually, that cover will change because it's now called Safeguarding Children and Young People. And there is a move to try and talk about vulnerable people in this space too. So we have people potentially in our organisations who aren't technically children, who are more vulnerable due to disability or other reasons. So being mindful that we're looking at people who have a greater level of vulnerability and making sure we put in place safeguards to keep them safe in our sport. So one of the things that policies do in this organisation, we want to try and bind people. So what we're actually looking for is people to buy in. So as we've looked at already, we've defined the behaviours, we've documented them, and we want that buy-in. We want people to actually say, I acknowledge that I'm happy to work under the policies and procedures or regulations of this organisation. So that's a really important part of jurisdiction and getting people under our banner. So people that are bound by this policy are members, clubs, zone states, national body staff, volunteers, contractors, pretty much anyone who says they will be bound by this policy. This is one of the areas that we are working on. So having a look at how we make sure that people are actually in our fold and in our clubs and a part of what we're doing. So in Pony Club, one of the areas that does cause a bit of concern, it's that area that's a little bit grey for us is adult supporters. So we're encouraging clubs to get adults who are regularly at your club and playing an important role in your club often to actually register as members because they are actually a part of your club because they're actively working to the success of your club. So they might think of themselves as members, but they are members. And in part, making them or getting them involved as being members or signed up as members, it protects them because they're also protected under our framework. So if things happen, we actually have some jurisdiction to help if that's what is going on, or there is obviously the jurisdiction to ensure that people abide by the values that we're setting up in the organisation. So super, super important for coaches to be members of the organisation, and really, really important for our club committees who are on as club administrators to be members of the organisation, and in general as a leadership, because we've talked about leadership, as a leaders of the organisation, really important that you're signing up as a member as well when you're sitting on committee. Is there any comments on that? Because I know clubs do struggle because we don't really see adults in the same way as writing members. It's just that's a cultural thing for the organisation. We sort of need to shift people's mind to say, hey, you know what, Pony Club doesn't happen without adults. You really are important to this organisation. You really are a member of it. So we want you to sign up and be a part of the organisation as a member because we're a membership-based organisation. I'll let you jot down. So I don't know how you're going with that. I don't know what challenges you might be having. So feel free to jot that in the little chat area. Hi to everyone who's rocked up since I started. Great to see you. So I thought we just wander through the policy. We might pick a few things up as we go through, but so you can see it, you'll see that this one's still in draft because I've still got little green things on it. But it is the new policy that's coming and should be out by the end of the year. So first up, we've got like the policy intent and the definitions. We go into things like, so there's just definitions in here that will help you to understand what the behaviours are that we're defining as being child abuse or any of the other definitions in the policy that might need a little bit more clarification. So that's what the definitions are for. Still definitions. We come down to jurisdiction. So this is how we're putting people under the banner of this policy. This is how we're encapsulating people. It's interesting comment, Bronwyn. Yeah. And I'm not quite sure how that works either. I can't give you too much light. I know PCV have popped everyone into the same bucket. If anyone's from the other states, that's how it's been managed in Pony Club Vic. Just popping back here. So jurisdiction, prohibited conduct. So we've been talking about behaviours we want, behaviours we don't want. In these policies, we're defining the behaviours that we don't want, and that's called prohibited conduct, things that we don't want to see. Also then reporting and complaints. So we start to, in these policies, say if they're breached or if there's a problem, people aren't working to them, what are we going to do? So there's a little bit around reporting and complaints, and then other matters. So we're just chatting about a few things in there. So that's pretty much the first part of the policy. Good to go and read the definitions, definitely. Understand jurisdiction, who is in there, and yeah, just have a bit of a read over the first part. And as the policy reading's a bit boring, but even if it takes you a little while, just do a few lines at a time, try and actually process what that policy is saying. Now, in the policy, and this policy is quite prescribed, so I do recommend that you go and have a bit of a read of it. This is the responding to child abuse allegations. So this is something that probably would be good to have up around your clubs, put it up on the wall and make sure your committee actually does see this. And even if you sit at a meeting and just say, let's go through it so we know what we're going to do in the event that we are concerned about a child abuse issue. So first up, you must act is what the laws are saying now. You actually need to do something if you're concerned that something's happening. Now, action number one, responding. So it goes through the fact that if a child is in immediate danger, that you would call 000 and deal with the issue. And it gives you a few other things in there to think about. Reporting. So who do you report this to? So definitely, depending on what the complaint is or concern is, you might be, as I say, calling the police and reporting it to an actual child group. So there's a little link in there to whoever the child protection group in your state is. There's a little link to take you to that space. Otherwise, if it's a less serious issue, like we have a coach who's absolutely screamed and yelled at a child, which is against the child safe policy, you would make your integrity complaint to Sport Integrity Australia. Now, you'd obviously ask that person to not do that behaviour, but you might think it's worthwhile reporting that behaviour so that it can be managed. And the reason particularly you might do this with coaches is coaches work across lots and lots of clubs. So if that behaviour is being repeated at lots and lots of clubs, it might be something that is worthwhile actually reporting or complaining about, so that some action can happen. And generally speaking, in that case, we'd probably come back with education for the coach to say that we don't talk that way anymore. One of the good things about having Sport Integrity Australia manage our child safeguarding issues is that people are no longer in the position where they need to go and address people directly, which they may feel uncomfortable about. It does give them the opportunity to come out and seek an external body for any issue that's concerning them. You can find these policies on the Pony Club Australia site. So I'll send you a link when we actually send the recording around. It's not a silly question. There are none. So if you're looking for this policy, the child safeguarding policy, jump onto the Pony Club Australia site, or you can just do Pony Club Australia child safeguarding, and there's an entire page on this. We'll just continue to send this page out because I know in club it's hard sometimes to get information. You're busy, things come across, you get lots of emails. So potentially you might be missing things as you go through. I would be suggesting that in this place, if you can maybe even mark up the Pony Club Australia newsletter. We are trying to cover these types of policies regularly in that newsletter. So as the years go around, it'll send you back to those places. We do try and pop that page up, and we'll probably pop that page up fairly regularly on social media as well. So if you're in our Facebook page, it'll probably pop up there. But definitely go and visit the website or just Google Child Safeguarding Pony Club Australia and you'll end up on the page. And once this one's done, we'll actually send that back around to your clubs. And we are actually asking clubs to if you've got sites, to actually go directly to our child safeguarding page or these integrity pages, because it'll cut down work for you. So when things change, we'll just change it. And so it's already updated for you. And B, that question might become a little bit easier because we'll have lots more spaces around the country that are feeding back to that one space where we're talking about that issue. So it means, as I say, less work for volunteers as well. You don't have to keep updating things as they change because they'll just get updated for you. But you are welcome to have your own page. But I am saying, for the sake of making it easier for yourselves, I'd just hook into that one. But I'll send it round so you'll have it, Cindy, and you can find all that resource with this webinar. Action 3, contact. So you must contact the police or relevant child protection agency. So depending on what it is, there's a little bit of information. No troubles whatsoever, Cindy. Action 4, support. So if the child involved with this needs support, then be in a place to actually offer that. And I would suggest you'll get lots and lots of information off the child protection service that's available for those things as well. But we'll try and build these resources for you, again, putting it back to that central spot so you can actually go and find the bits and pieces that might help you do this as we go along and become better at it as an organisation. So going through Annex B, child, young person, safe practices. So that used to be child safe practices. We've now gone child, young person, safe practices. This one's a really good one. I think if you're actually going to sit down and try and put a little bit of child safeguarding into your meetings, that, as I say, go through this policy and sort of take the bits and pieces. But this is a really good one to just go through. And you may not do it all at the same time either. You might just say we're going to do a couple every time we meet to start looking at what this actually means for us. So this talks about professional boundaries, use of language, tone and voice, so that we are sort of changing the culture of maybe because there has been a culture in sport where the coach screams and yells, or in society in general, that their children get screamed and yelled at. We're trying to change that because it's not the kind of behaviour we actually want. We don't think that children enjoy it. It doesn't make their fun time, which Pony Club is fun. So we're going to try and shift a culture a little bit with that to say that behaviour is no longer an acceptable behaviour. Positive guidance. So that's around discipline. How do we manage kids when they're not actually doing what we're wanting them to do? So what are the parameters that we get to work in? Supervision. How do we supervise kids? Use of electronic and online communication. Really, really important part for clubs, because this is where people who are maybe trying to abuse a child, that space gives them an opportunity. It's like a little room, I guess, where an adult and a child are together and people can't see it. So we've got to try and set up environments where the club says, well, that's not what happens. We need this environment when we're setting up those online spaces. But we also make sure that the parent and the child are aware that no one will talk to them in an online space by themselves. So if currently, and sometimes in clubs that's a bit tricky as well because everyone knows everyone, but I think just at least having those 3 points of contact that a child has never spoken to directly without their parent in that conversation is probably one step forward to ensuring that that's just a culture, that's just what we do, everyone just accepts that's how we go about doing business. Photographs or video of children, young people. So there's a little bit of a space in here that I think will I'll try and give a lot better direction to clubs as we go through. It is one of the most important things about this is that when we use an image of a child, we need to ask permission to do it. And that the taking of children's photos as well, we probably really need to be going through more of a process to say that the parent is happy that a photo is being taken of their child. And also, if we take that out into photography, that photographers often put their images on a open, they're sort of like online somewhere, that where is that happening, who is it, and have we done any diligence around who the photographer is in general, and people who don't want to have that happen, how do they tell people they don't want to have that happen? So a little bit of an interesting case for Pony Club in there. It talks on physical contact with young children, so talking about what's appropriate and what's not. So again, we're defining behaviours that are okay and not okay. Go into overnight stays and sleeping arrangements. So if we're going on camps or those types of things, what do we need to have happen? How do we need to set these things up? Change room arrangements, not necessarily a huge issue for Pony Club, I don't think, but yeah, being aware that if we've got change rooms or something or a space where people are changing. What do we need to do? Use and possession of alcohol or drugs with children, parent and carer involvement. So how do we get them involved in these conversations? Transporting children and young people. So if we actually have to transport someone, there's a few things that are in there. So building that into our club, again, keeping in mind that often it's someone's parent with a friend, but making sure that we've got sort of a bit of a structure around how that happens, and drop off and pick up of children and young people. Again, this is all defining behaviours. So when you read the policy, it will tell you what those behaviours are that are okay. Now, child safe do's and don'ts, that's kind of like a summary of what's in this part of the policy. So I highly recommend that you jump into that. That, Cindy, is also on the child safeguarding page on the Pony Club Australia website. But I'll also try and make sure that any of these resources that I'm talking about tonight, I pop round so you have them as well. Best practice guidance. This is a new one. This has popped into the new policy and just helps you to understand what it is that you should be doing in a child safeguarding space. So one of them is to adopt the child safe commitment. So we'll send that around again when we've updated everything. So I just recommend that you adopt that one, send it around to your members, make sure that they're aware, put it up somewhere in your club so that people can read it and see it. And again, we'll probably be lifting things at various stages. So if you as a club wanted to raise that commitment statement every now and again, that's about that buy-in. That's making sure that people are aware of what we actually want from them. So yeah, I highly recommend you sort of look as clubs and say, how do we make sure that these things are presented on various bases, and so that people actually are aware that they're there. So when Cindy says, I don't know where it is, that maybe they're not having that occasion because they're just being presented with it. So at some point they'll see it. Adopt and implement appropriate recruitment, screening and training. This is one of the most important parts about safeguarding. So we'll talk about screening, but the recruitment and the training parts of who we've got in different roles, it's really important to start looking at how we get people into various roles in Pony Club and what training we're providing them or requiring from them is the other one. Establishing a culturally safe environment. So there's a little bit of conversation around what that is. You'll find that Victoria, this is potentially a change for Victoria in terms of the National Integrity Framework, because there was concerns that Victoria have slightly different laws in around this, in around child safeguarding, and they have 11 standards where national standards are 10. And one of them is around cultural safety. So yeah, having been mindful, this is around Aboriginal, but also COLD communities, being aware that we're providing an environment that has them feel comfortable in our environment. Ensure children, that's a really simple statement around what that is, but again, we'll be fleshing these things out. So when I send you out those annoying emails and you go, poof, I've got so much else on, it's really about trying to shift thoughts and trying to get you to move in directions that will help us to create a child safe environment. So don't get stressed if I send you something you're not quite sure how to get it done. I prefer actually almost come back, like Cindy said, don't know where it is. Just let us know, not sure what you want me to do, don't know how to do this. Can I have a resource? Because I'll go and find you a resource or get one made. Just having a look. Yes. Yes, it is, Melissa. I'd go and check me because I'm hoping that things haven't changed. But yes, and it will just be about how you keep that as well. So potentially you would only keep it for a certain amount of time, or you potentially give it to the parent. So once you've gone through it and you've talked about it, so it'll be about how it's taken and how it's kept after that period of time. But have a chat, have a little look on that photography one. Yeah, yeah. So that'd be fine, Melissa, if they're happy. Ensure children and young people are empowered. So this really big part of the child safeguarding part is to actually look at it from that child's perspective, or get that young person's perspective, so that we actually take our adult mindset off it and put it into that child and young person space. That one I'm interested, as we go through, about the experiences other sports have had and how they've done this. So that will be an interesting space as we go forward. Child safeguarding policy. This is the commitment statement. So again, reading this and actually understanding it, but I also encourage you, if you go through and read this, that we're going through and saying, are we doing it? If we're doing it, how? Could we do it better? So that's that whole risk management sort of space. So you'll find there's different things in here that are saying we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Are we doing it right currently? How can we do it better? And I'm more than happy for you guys to be working forward. We'll probably still give you, we'll be putting things out over a journey, trying to get that change, that cultural change we're looking for. But if you want to be active in your clubs and start looking at a few things and say, yes, we can do, or yes, we're doing this, is that good enough? Yeah, just ask those questions of yourself. And so this document will actually help you go through a few of the things that we've committed to as an organisation to do in this space. Recruitment and screening. So this is a really important area of who we are. We probably, as an organisation, some of this recruitment isn't really how we operate. Obviously, when you've got committees, people put their hand up to do a role. And so they're not really being recruited to that role so much as they're taking up a role on a committee and being voted in to do it. But a couple of the roles we do actually go out and we're sort of seeking people to do, and one of those is particularly coaching. So having a look at these recruitment and screening sort of ideas around what we can be doing for those people we're actually bringing into our organisation to do jobs for us. There's some good stuff in here to make sure that the people we're bringing in are suitable. So outside of just doing working with children's checks, there's potential to do a few more things in there to try and work out whether that person's suitable to be working with children. So I will just whip through. I'm going to have a look at child-related roles, position descriptions, how you advertise. So I don't know that we necessarily advertise, but if you're ever advertising for coaches, then there's a few things that you should know in this policy about what you put into that advertising. If you're interviewing, so you actually do any interviews, then what you can do, and if you're not technically interviewing, is there something else the club can do to sort of cover off on some of these recruitment and screening practices? Working with children's checks, obviously looking that the screening will have a bit of a closer look at. There's national criminal history record checks and international criminal history record checks, depending on who we're actually getting into our organisations and for what purpose. Monitoring compliance, so making sure that we stay on top of the things that we need people to do. And then reference checks, so actually going and asking people. So particularly when it comes to coaches, if we've got someone new coming in, it probably doesn't hurt, to pick up the phone or to ask them for some references and have a bit of a chat with people, or to talk to clubs where they've previously been. So just get an idea of how that person did in that role. Qualifications and registration checks. So making sure that the people who we're actually getting into do jobs for us do have qualifications, because within those qualifications, they're going to go through some of these learnings and understand different things about the organisation. Also, knowing how to manage coaching groups and teaching kids how to ride horses is something we kind of want to know. Registration checks, so making sure they're actually members of the organisation, or ensuring that we've got them under our banner, that they've actually accepted our values and our culture. Engagement of children and young people. So that is talking about children who are under the age of 18 in different parts of the country. And we'll talk about screening a bit closer. There are a few different legalities around who needs what and when. So being aware of those is really important depending on what state we're in. And then just training. So making sure that when we've got people in, we actually do training. So again, thank you tonight. You guys have come to this training, but understanding that the more we can tell people, the more informed they are, the more they will understand what the expectations of them are or of other people. So we just end up with a better culture because we're actually training everyone in how we want them to act, basically. So screening, I've gone to screening, working with children's checks, working with vulnerable people, blue cards. They're called lots of different things across country, and they do work differently in each state. Legislation is different as well around the country around child safeguarding. The NIF have worked quite closely with, Sport Integrity Australia, so have worked quite closely with all the states to try and get the requirements of the legislation into the policy that we're putting up, so that it should really cover what's happening in each state and be comfortable with what's going on. So screenings will do a couple of things for you in that it actually eliminates people who shouldn't be working with children straight up. So that's one of the bonuses of screening. It'll also, if we do it properly, allow you to understand that someone's no longer able to hold a working with children's check or some type of screening, whichever screening they've got. It will tell you during that period of time, usually 5 years, that that person is no longer eligible to hold a working with children check. So that gives you a bit of a heads up around someone having not now be eligible to hold that card. For us, it must be registered on the database. We just want people to go in and register they're working with children's checks so that we've got expiry dates and we've got a little bit more of oversight on what's going on in those spaces. I've had a little bit of feedback from clubs that they actually found it easy when people are coming in and showing them cards. So there's no reason why your club can't do that, but just ask them to go onto the database and actually register that as well. So that you, if it's easier to physically see the card and know that they've actually got one, but yeah, then say to them, can you go on and register on the database in the credentials area? And that obviously will ultimately help your club too, because it'll create a list and you'll be able to export things from the database so that you can actually have a look at what's going on as well around the people who should or shouldn't have them, or should have them, sorry. Legal requirements for your club should be understood. So being aware of what the legislation is in this area, there's some good pages that talk about this, but the child safeguarding and working with children's checks, there is a little bit of law that's running across all this. So being aware of what you need to do as a club, even though you're volunteers, clubs are still legal entities. You guys are running a legal entity, and that legal entity needs to operate under the laws of the land. So being aware of what they are, making sure that you're aware of who actually should hold checks. We will obviously give you direction as to who we want to have a check. And that will be over and above the law generally, but there will be requirements for various people to hold them. Now, in South Australia, if you're 14 and you're doing a job that's a volunteer job with children, you need to have a check. So that's a difference. That would be different to some other states. So just being aware of what you actually legally need to be doing as well is quite important in this space. And that screening is only one part of safeguarding. So as I say, probably the most important thing about screening is it eliminates people who shouldn't be working with children before we even have them come in. So that's why it's important to actually check that they've got one before they start working with us. But yeah, it's not the be all and end all. It doesn't mean we're safe. There's lots of other things we need to do to ensure that we are safe. And some of that important stuff's around the recruitment and knowing who we're actually bringing into our clubs. So within here, we've got child-related position assessment. So this actually helps you come up with, understand what is considered a child-related role. We'll be doing this as well. We'll go through and as much as possible, go through the roles we know exist in Pony Club and try and define which ones are child-related. But you can jump in there and have a little bit of a look at what is, so you might be able to assess some of the roles that are sitting in your club right now. I'd really love to have this as a page on our website, so if you could pop in and put your positions in there, then at least I know what positions are out there as well. That'd be really great. But I'll send that around if I get it sorted. Interview recommendations and sample questions. Again, if we're interviewing people, we don't tend to interview people in Pony Club, but if you do sort of have this situation where you could ask a few questions, whether it be an online space or whatever, or you actually are having a formal interview because you are going to have a coach that's going to go with a team somewhere, get into the habit of actually doing this. Make sure we're asking a few questions. This one's reference checking. So these are the recommendations around reference checking and sample questions. Child safeguard, I'm almost finished. You've hung in there so well. Child safeguarding and sport induction course. I've been promoting this. I'd really love committees, coaches to get in and do this course. And the reason is that this course will help you to understand the policy and what's written in it. I have had a few people tell me that it gets caught at the end. If it gets caught at the end for you, feel free to screenshot that, put it in an email and send it to me, and I'll send it on to ASC and just say, it's caught, can you actually update it for this person? I'm then asking people to actually record that as a credential in the database, and that's just so we can actually report on how many people are actually going and doing this course. So yeah, I encourage you to do that for me as well, because then I can say we're actually doing a really great job. But club committee members and coaches, I think this is an invaluable course for them. Club committee members should be across all this stuff so that you know and you can actually help people to understand policy. But it also puts it in context. This sort of helps you to put it in live scenarios. Member Protection Information Officer. This is coming out in the newsletter for September. This course was sort of a little bit on ice and it's just recently been released again. There's two parts to this course. So there's an online part, which means that as committee members, if you're interested in knowing about member protection information officer, what they do, and it's around managing complaints, or help, not so much managing complaints, but helping people to navigate complaints if they're unhappy, what they need to do. Really important. So I'd actually recommend that community members think about doing at least the online part of this. There's a second part, which is face-to-face training, which is actually doing online. So anyone who wants to actually be nominated as a member protection information officer in the field is more than welcome to go through the second part. But I do encourage committee members to actually jump in and do the first part online, so you have an understanding of what goes on in that space. Obviously, if you want to appoint a member protection information officer at your club, probably not a bad idea. Does help to navigate issues as they arise, and someone can be quite knowledgeable on what's happening in that space. So that's a little plug for that. That's the e-learning space as well. I'll send that in the notes to this webinar. Reinforcing behaviour. So just coming back, when we looked at changing culture and looking at what we do, defining behaviours, documenting them in some way, shape or form so we can keep presenting them to people or put them up when they're buying into our clubs. Creating buy-in, so making sure that people are aware of what's going on and really promoting the behaviours that we want. When we don't get the behaviours, so we can reinforce behaviours in that we get the positive ones and we celebrate the positive behaviours that we want from people in our clubs. When we don't, then we sort of need a strategy around what we do to say, hey, you've actually broken this rule or you've broken this policy. So the conduct and discipline policy is a national policy that's been brought in. It was put in about 1st of July 2022. That's also sitting on our webpage, Cindy, if you want to go and have a look at that one. And this policy just helps to give clarity to everyone around how a complaint can be managed and what might happen if we breach policies. So within this policy, we talk about there's warning procedure, there's breach offers, and there's alternative dispute resolution. So I am encouraging clubs to have a bit of a look at this policy and seeing if they are, if it's going to help them to manage complaints. So when people aren't doing what we want them to do, can they put in place a process that's more positive? There is actually a complaint form on the national website. So if you've got someone who wants to formally complain, I'm happy that they complain on there, and we'll go back through into this policy, and I'll come back through to your club and help and try and support the complaint. Not so much me, but someone will help you support the complaint management. On top of this policy, there's also a review and appeals policy. So it means that if we don't quite get there and people are unhappy, there's also a review and appeal, so people can actually get that natural justice that we should be providing them. The other NIF policies are actually under this conduct, disputes and disciplinary policy. I'm just mentioning it so that you know. Again, it gives clarity to how things are going to be managed. So if there's a complaint to Sport Integrity Australia, you know what's going to actually happen. You can read this policy and know what actually happens. So it outlines the processes and potential sanctions that can happen in that policy. Resources, very, very quickly. This is the Safeguarding Children and Young People page on the website that you want to go and have a look at, Cindy, and I'll send to you. I haven't taken the whole shot. There's a whole heap of resources underneath that sort of try and put together everything that we're talking about with child safeguarding. The safeguarding page on Sport Integrity Australia you can go and have a look at that. We've got a link from our site to it. Sometimes it's a bit tricky finding the resources, but there's some really good resources and they are building specifically well in this area. So you'll notice here there's responding and reporting to breaches of child safeguarding policy. Really good one to put up at your club so you know what's going to happen in that space. Child protection reporting information. So if you want a bit more information on what you need to do if you're concerned about the welfare of a child. Recruitment and screening of staff and volunteers in child-related positions. So again, a little bit of support in there. Recruitment and screening checklist. Induction of new volunteers and staff checklist. Events involving overnight stays. So again, there's a little bit more information to help you navigate what's in that policy. And you'll see, I'm not going to read them all. You can read them. You can take a photo. I'll actually send you, I'll try and send you the link to this page. I'd say it's a bit tricky to get in there. It's basically under resources. So I'll try and send you the resource page, and then you might need to navigate down to safeguarding. There's lots and lots of things, and there's a few more resources that are coming out, checklists and things to help you provide a safe environment. Session takeaways. My biggest takeaway for you is to get familiar with the association's policies. So particularly in the child safeguarding space, make sure that you're aware of that policy and the member protection policy as well. I'd also throw in the actual Pony Club policy of code of conduct as well into that space. Ensure behaviours are upheld at your club. So if you have a culture you're trying to set at your club and you want people to do certain things, make sure that they actually do uphold it. When people don't do it in a gentle way, just to say to them, we need you to act like this, and bring them back to wherever you've got it written down. Understand how to manage behaviour at clubs. So being aware of what you're going to do, understanding what's going to happen if someone does break or breach your rules or policies, how are we actually going to manage it? Ensure you have a member protection information officer. So I would highly recommend putting or seeing if you can get someone to do that, or at least going through that first part of the training so your club is a little bit more aware of what to do if things happen at your club that you're not happy with. Ensure your committee and coaches have a working with children's check. Make sure they do that course. Make sure that you pop in and ask your committee to actually go and do that course, the child safeguarding induction in sport induction course. And as a committee, take some time to actually talk about child safe practices. So put it on your agenda and just contribute a little bit of time. So you might just say, we're going to spend 10 minutes. We're only going to have a look at one little bit. And so it might be a resource, it might be something in the policy, whatever it is. Just take a little bit of time to actually have a chat about it. Very quickly, game plan. This is a portal to sign up. You can get to it off our website. This is the safeguarding module that might help you to navigate a few of these issues as well. Next webinar is risk management, which is a pretty good little unit. I think there's lots of things that we actually do that are risk management. We don't maybe think that we are doing in risk management. So hopefully you'll find that session interesting and enjoyable. It's happening on the Tuesday, the 26th of September, unless someone wants to correct me. I think I had the last one wrong. And if you've got any questions, I'm available for chatting. More than happy to chat with you in either of these spaces, or if you've got anything else that you've popped in there tonight. But otherwise, thank you so much for being here tonight. Sorry, I was just reading what Cecilia's written. I'll answer that in a moment. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you if you've watched this webinar all the way through. It's been fabulous to have you. I hope you've learned something. And with this safeguarding, particularly child safeguarding, it is like a space to watch. The things we will build things within the organisation over the next few years to actually increase the level of child safeguarding in the organisation. So no one gets stressed about that. We'll just work through it gradually, and we'll find a way to ensure that we're providing the safest environment for children to be involved with. So you guys have been great. Thanks for being here tonight, and I'll catch you in the next one. I'm just going to stop.